Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel today. Unlike earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, and other natural disasters, extreme heat, drought, flooding, and storms resulting from the climate crisis are anything but natural. Fortunately, there's a lot that we can do and undo about it. In addition to cutting emissions, the other half of the equation is removing those emissions from the atmosphere. Today, carbon removal has moved from the edges of the climate movement to become a global industry involving big buyers and ready-to-scale suppliers. We're going to talk about the current state of play for carbon removal, what deployment of carbon removal really looks like in terms of both cost and time, and how to drive demand and who should be involved. My name is Susan. I'm an investing partner at Tova Capital, a venture capital fund based in the United States where I focus on climate investing. And I'm also a member of the board of directors of the Carbon Business Council, a nonprofit trade association representing over 110 carbon removal organizations operating globally that are technology neutral. And I'm really excited to welcome my panelists today. So I will go ahead and have everybody introduce yourselves, starting with Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Takigawa. I'm manager CCUS CDR at Mitsubishi Corporation, Mitsubishi Shoji. I work on commercial scale, large scale projects, carbon removal projects that suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, store it for permanently, such as direct air capture and storage. And I also work for a company called NextGen, which is a buyer's facility where we procure carbon credits from these large-scale carbon removal projects on behalf of our clients. Yeah, that's me.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Joanna Klitzke. I lead our carbon removal purchasing and broader ecosystem efforts for Frontier. We are an advanced market commitment to spend $1 billion buying permanent carbon removal over the next decade. Frontier was started in 2022 by Stripe, a global payments company, along with Meta, McKinsey, Shopify, Google, other companies. And the goal was really to think about how we could help build carbon removal today so that we can get to the scale of carbon removal that we need in the future in 2030 and beyond. In practice, we work with a number of scientists to pick really promising projects and then facilitate transactions with buyers. And happy to share more.
Hello, everyone. James Burbridge, Director of Advisory Work at Carbon Direct. Carbon Direct is an end-to-end carbon management company. We help largest companies in the world, Microsoft, JP Morgan, others, manage their carbon emissions with a combination of software platform and advisory work. On the advisory side, where I focus, the work tends to look like one of three things. One, where are my emissions coming from? Helping our clients understand where their emissions are coming from in their operational footprint or in their individual products through LCAs. Strategy development, how am I going to get from here to there on my SBTI commitment, my various net zero commitments? And then the last piece, the voluntary carbon markets, which I think we'll be talking about a lot today, helping steer our clients and using our deep science team, steer them towards good projects, steer them away from bad projects. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryota Yamada from Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. And our ministry promotes the green transformation called GX to reach the net zero goal and also realize Japanese economic growth. And in part of it, I am in charge of CDL sector and how to create and expand CDL market in Japan. And we have held a study group for creating CDL markets last year, and we are discussing with expert groups what is the best way to support by policy measures to create and expand CDL ecosystem in Japan. Thank you.
Great. Well, let's set a little bit of a baseline first. There's an increasing awareness around the globe supported by organizations such as METI, all the way to the US government, to the UN that we will not be able to decarbonize the global economy without carbon removal. How do each of your organizations view carbon removal as part of the overall decarbonization puzzle alongside emissions reductions and everything else? Let's start with Yamada-san.
Okay, so as you know, Japan commits to net zero goal by 2050, and in Japan, we estimated from IPCC scenario that there will be roughly 50 million to 240 million tons of residual emissions. That if we try to reduce the emission, maybe there will be some extent of residual emissions from the industrial and transportation sectors, so-called hard to abate sector. And so this means carbon removal at the level of 100 million tons of it will be necessary for Japan to reach net zero goal. We recognize a wide variety. There's a wide variety of CDL technology. And we pursue all of these technologies. And also many of CDL technologies and markets still in their infancy. Policies to support CDL have been progressing rapidly. We can see the example like US Inflation Reduction Act. They offered the tax credit scheme up to $180 when you implement tax. And also EU discuss about the carbon removal certification framework. That they discuss the regulation framework for creating CDL carbon credits. So it can be said that the market for CDL has started its expansion, and also the competition to become a global leader in the CDL sector has begun. So not only for as a means to reach net zero goal, but also strengthen Japanese industrial competitiveness and realize Japanese economic growth. We see the CDL is so important. We see CDL is so important. So this is why we think we act now as a governmental level to create CDL ecosystem.
James, carbon is right in Carbon Direct's name.
Yep.
And we know you're biased on the carbon removal side, but please tell us how you think about how it fits into the full equation.
Yeah, I think, kind of building on what Yamada-san is saying, you have to focus on reductions first. All of our clients that come in for strategy development help, we are very upfront about you have to focus on your own internal reductions first before you come into the voluntary carbon market and you come to the carbon removal space. But that said, every net zero commitment is going to require some volume of carbon removals. There is just an irreducible fraction of emissions in every single industry that we cannot reduce out. The hard to abate sectors are the ones that get the most focus. So this is steel production, this is cement creation, this is chemical manufacturing, aviation, shipping. We cannot decarbonize those down to zero, period. So we're going to need carbon removal technologies to actually achieve those net zero commitments. And then everything else that Yamada-san was saying is, yes, it's very nascent today. I think the companies that are getting ahead of this now and the nations that are getting ahead of this now are investing their dollars to develop this industry they know they're going to need in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And so our role is really in trying to guide them through this incredibly complex set of projects and technologies that all carry first of a kind risk, that all carry technology risk, but they are essential to everything going forward. And so now is the time when they're getting ahead of this. And so that's, yeah.
Thanks. Joanna?
Maybe the only thing that I would add are a few numbers around the scale of carbon removal that we're talking about. When you look at the climate models, we need anywhere from 3 to 10 billion tons of carbon removal a year. And that's if we do everything right on decarbonizing our full system. And so if we want to be at 10 billion, 5 billion tons in 2030, 2050, the capacity now is tiny. We have some nature-based solutions. We have a little bit of durable removal, but we are nowhere close to 10 billion or even 5 billion or 3 billion tons. And so for us, the motivation is really how can we slowly build that capacity so that we have carbon removal when we need it. And I think there's also a lot of really exciting business opportunity in carbon removal that we can talk about as well.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's quite obvious that we all need carbon removal by 2050 or even 2030. The hard-to-abate sectors, the transitions of the global south is a really hard decarbonization pathway. I think we have to also think about the accumulated CO2 that we emitted in the past. These are all something that we need to work on with carbon removal. I think as thinking about Mitsubishi Corporation, we're a large industrial conglomerate having network with various industries, including a lot of hard-to-abate sectors, a lot of Asian countries, a lot of global south companies. So it's very natural for us to think, how can we support decarbonization for our customers? And carbon removal is something very important. And so it's very natural for us, like a company like us, or even Japanese corporates who have a very similar business model to work on carbon removal. I'll just briefly mention lastly, so Joanna, you mentioned about the gigatons of scale. That's the volume of the carbon market. But if you think about the value of this, it's sujuchon and suhyakchon. It's an incredible large-scale business opportunity that everybody can be part of. So not just the carbon front, but I think people should be thinking this is a business opportunity that you don't want to be left over, and there's something that you can do as of today to be part of that problem. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. I really like that you brought up historical emissions. I think sometimes we forget that even if we reduce all of our emissions to zero in the next minute at 10:15 a.m. today, we will still have decades of baked-in warming from all of the historical over-emissions that we've generated. And in terms of markets, we can almost think of that as baked-in demand that's already standing in line, ready to go, in a sense, in terms of how much of an opportunity this really is. So we've talked a lot about hard to abate. I would like to maybe just, for just a couple minutes, define that a little bit better for people. Why are certain sectors so hard to abate? Please, anyone jump in with an example. We can talk about aviation. Chris, you mentioned the Global South and energy development, steel, James, and anything, Yamada-san, that you think of as hard to abate and this remainder in the carbon budget for Japan itself. Please, anybody jump in, and everybody please chime in on this one. What is hard to abate and why?
Yeah, I can jump in. One easy example is aviation. So the average, if you take a flight from Tokyo to New York, it emits about 400 tons of CO2. That's 80 times the amount of an average passenger vehicle. It's a lot. And there are a number of ways that we can think about reducing the emissions for airplanes. We can build more sustainable fuels, but ultimately it is going to take us a lot of time to build fuels that are clean. And even if we do, there will still be some remaining emissions. And so the role of removal is really, how do we give us the buffer to allow those emissions reductions to occur? And then how do we remove the remaining residual emissions from airplanes?
Yeah, I think when I think about shipping, I mean, in most cases, hard to abate means they require lots of energy, lots of heat, lots of electricity. As far as fuels go, it's very hard to match the energy density of liquid fuels. We're very good at, and it's very cheap for us to produce a lot of petroleum-based fuels. The infrastructure exists today already to transport these fuels all over the world. And in certain, aviation is a good one. You can't strap a battery onto a plane and fly to Tokyo. It would just be, it's impractical, it's infeasible. in shipping, it's the same kind of challenge. You need energy-dense fuels that can basically power the entire economy. And you can decarbonize some of these by redesigning what ships look like. What are the propulsion systems for them? There are shipping companies that are using wind power to try to reduce their fuel burn as they're kind of doing these transoceanic journeys. There are alternative fuels being designed there, and ammonia and green hydrogen, but it always comes back to there's that irreducible fraction. You get so far with reductions and you can go very far, but there's going to be a piece at the end that you're going to need the removals for, and that's where this market is ultimately, I think, going to be serving a lot of.
I'll maybe quickly mention about the steel sector since you brought it up. Well, more and broader, the metal and the mining industry, I think we think a lot about them because as a corporate, we're very close partners with that industry, but it's also one of the hardest to abate sectors from our point of view. But that said, I think it's a very interesting industry because they have a lot of waste products coming out of their process, the whole value chain, and there's tons of this. And this is actually things that you can be utilizing for solutions for CDR. I don't want to go through like the specifics today, but these materials can actually suck CO2 from the atmosphere for direct air capture or enhanced rock weathering or ocean alkalinity or any type of different solutions in CDR. So there is, again, going back to what I said before about the business case, there are pathways that they can leverage their value chain to be part of the solution to actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. Yeah.
So hard-to-abate sectors has no alternative methods to reach the net zero goal. For example, as Takigawa says, the steel sector, they use a coal to produce a high quality of steel, and for now, they do not have alternative measures to produce high quality steel other than using coal. They can produce high quality steel using much of electricity. But if they reach the net zero goal, they use much of renewable energy to use electricity, and it will be possible that they get a much of electricity enough to produce high quality of steel. So maybe the CDO is helping to offset the residual emissions to the sector that has no alternative way to decarbonization.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about our carbon budget, how we're never going to meet the budget without carbon removal. We've talked a bit about hard to abate and what that looks like. I want to talk about the buy side now. Who is out there today buying carbon removal? Let's start there, and then we'll tie that back into these hard to abate sectors and see if we're seeing some of those folks getting involved. We have a number of people all representing buyers here on stage, so I think you're the perfect people to talk about this. James, why don't you kick us off? Who all are you seeing coming to Carbon Direct? You guys are sort of that broker in the middle, the one-stop shop for all things carbon removal. Who's in your client base? Has that changed over the last 5 years, 18 months?
Yep.
And where do you think it's going?
Great question. So our client base today, we service tech companies, financial service companies. I think this is predominantly who makes up the demand side of the market. Microsoft, I think, really fired the gun here on this market in 2020, I think, when they made this commitment to removing all of their historical emissions. Prior to that announcement, I think this was maybe, conceptual for a lot of people, but when they made that commitment, going all the way back to 1975, they kind of fired the gun and said, we now need to create this market. They are the biggest buyer in the market. If you go to websites like cdr.fyi, you can see a kind of dashboard of who's buying and who's selling in this market. It's still very bilateral, so it's not a complete data set, but they are by and large the biggest buyer in the space. Banks and financial service companies, they tend to come in next. I think the trend lines that you see here are, if you've got high margins in your business and you've got relatively low emissions in your operational footprint, that's who makes up the bulk of who's buying today. They can afford it, and they tend to be companies with kind of outsized corporate presence. They have very visible brand names. That's who generally makes up most of the market. How is it changing? How has it changed? I think we are starting to get more of the hard to abate sectors involved in this market. Aviation has made a big play in the past the past 12 months. Companies like ANA have come out and they've purchased from projects from 1.5 in Texas. You've got Airbus coming out with their huge purchase from the 1.5 facility as well. You've got others that are purchasing through Airbus, like EasyJet, Ryanair, some of the European airlines. Climeworks is selling to Lufthansa and Swiss Air. So the aviation sector is kind of coming on quickly. We work with some other companies in the hard to abate sectors like Mitsui OSK Lines. They have committed to net zero commitment by 2050, and they've had the same kind of conversation we're talking about up here. We're going to reduce, but at the end of the day, there's going to be this huge chunk, about 2 million tons they need to procure from, and so they're getting involved in the market early. I think the other trends that we're seeing, and it's small, but I think it will be important from an education perspective. We're seeing a lot more visible, high net worth individuals stepping up. They fly a lot of private jets. They get dinged in the headlines. Taylor Swift flies from Tokyo to Las Vegas for the Super Bowl. She got written about all day long, and I think there's now celebrities and high net worth individuals that are starting to say, all right, we'll remove those emissions from the air. It's small, it's very small fry compared to what, ANA or Mitsui OSK Lines is doing, but the market is still small enough that it matters. And I think having any purchase whatsoever from some of these more expensive, high potential technologies is really, really important. So I think I'm expecting to see a lot more from that over the next probably 12 months.
Joanna, you represent what I believe will be 21st century's next big bank. And what started out as purchases on behalf of Stripe evolved into Frontier, which is all about advanced market commitment and building a coalition around early buyers. Can you tell us what an advanced market commitment is and who is represented in Frontier and how that has changed since you've been there over the last few years?
Absolutely. So an advanced market commitment is really just a commitment to buy a product in the future and to set aside demand for that product. The goal is really to send a demand signal that there is a lot of money set aside to support and purchase a future product at a certain quality level. And the goal is really to de-risk people going after building that up front. This is actually an idea that didn't come from us. We borrowed this idea from the global health space. So in the early 2000s, we didn't have a low-cost vaccine for pneumococcal. And pharmaceutical companies didn't want to invest in tons of research and development and technology to build that vaccine without knowing if someone would want to buy that product. And so governments, philanthropies, private buyers said, hey, we have 1.5 billion in subsidies that we will commit to purchase your future low-cost vaccine if you build it. If you build it, we will buy. And so that was the spark that got everyone focused on getting to that point. And so at the end of that, hundreds of millions of low-cost vaccines from pneumococcal were produced. The estimate is that it saved millions of lives as well. And so we're trying to use that idea in carbon removal. Can we say that we'll spend a lot over the next decade? So if you're an entrepreneur, you're an investor, you're someone looking at this market, there is demand that is coming online. The buyers in our group are a mix of similar to James, your clients. It is everyone from financial services and JP Morgan. It's everyone in tech from Google to Facebook. It's companies in retail, H&M. It's a mix right now, but we are increasingly seeing companies beyond those sectors thinking about how they participate in the market, whether it's on direct demand or, as Chris said, it's thinking about what are my heavy assets, what is my industry, what different feedstocks do I have that could actually play a role in some of the technologies and remove carbon. So if I'm a mine and I have valuable mine waste, if I am a wastewater treatment plant, could I incorporate carbon removal into those walls? If I'm a desalination plant, if I'm an agricultural collective that works with a lot of farmers, how can I integrate carbon removal into my business and build on that? So we're starting to see more and more interest and appetite from that sector.
Speaking of how can I integrate carbon removal into my business, Chris, can you tell us how Mitsubishi views that and how that's changed over just since the years in which you've been working on it?
Sure. So our primary goal is really to become one of the largest CDR project developers. So we're talking a lot about demand side, but you need these projects, the suppliers, to actually deliver carbon removals. But that said, there's a very limited market today, so therefore we have to grow this market. So we're both working on the supply side and the demand side. The supply side, so we think we're in a very unique space where we're a unique company where we have the networks between various industries, and carbon removal is very similar. It's not just one specific technology, but there's a variety of technologies that relate to different industries. So we're trying to leverage these networks, our knowledges from our past experiences of project development in various industries for carbon removal, and that's what we're good at. I think it's good that we also have the relationship with the various partners in these industries as well. So for example, one of our projects is a DAX project that we're building in Louisiana together with Shell.
And sorry, Chris, DAX?
Sorry about that. DAX is direct air capture, which is a technology that you can suck CO2 out from the atmosphere using a large-scale facility like a fan, and storing that CO2 maybe underground permanently so that CO2 will never come out. That's called tanso jokyo in Japanese. So it's a carbon removal project that we're developing, but we can't do this on our own, and we have to leverage these partnerships, but it's good involving companies like Shell or other folks in the industry where they have their own expertise and we can work together. And lastly, I'll maybe talk about briefly on adding to Joanna's point on the demand side. So there wouldn't be any market today without your work for Microsoft or all of these companies, but it's still a very niche market. It's a very much US-based, very much tech-based industry, or maybe finance and aviation coming in. But I think it's really important to think about how we can involve the hard-to-abate sectors. And therefore, a company like NextGen, where we establish, is really to achieve that, to invite these hard-to-abate sectors, how they can also be involved in the carbon market in a very clever way. So I think that's really the next steps, and we're proud to have a company like Mitsui OS K-Lines as part of NextGen and other industries to follow to be part of this problem. Yeah.
And speaking of demand side and buyers that are not tech companies or banks, Yamada-san, can you please tell us a little bit about Japan's ETS and the role that government plays in shaping carbon markets?
Okay, so I understand that only a few sectors are currently leading demand, but the CDO is an issue for all sectors, including hard-to-abate sectors. And so in Japan, hard-to-abate sectors have a large presence, and they also will need a CDO to achieve net zero goal. And CDL ecosystems and compliant carbon markets are not well developed now. So for now, it's largely up to the voluntary efforts of private sectors. But the cost of removal is still much higher than the reduction technologies like introducing solar panels. This is why we believe that it's important for governments to support and stimulate the demand for CDL in early stages. So we are studying the several policy in the US, EU, and UK policies, and we are now discussing in the study group what is the best way to support the CDL, early CDL market in Japan. And especially about the ETS, we have studied ETS emission trading scheme last year, and the Japanese companies can trade the amount of emission or carbon credits voluntarily in this scheme. And during the first phase until 2025, we include CDL credits as eligible credits that can be used in the emission trading scheme to achieve the decarbonization, to private companies' decarbonization targets, even if the voluntary credits. So maybe it offers a critical signal for demand side and also supply side. Maybe we think that CDL is needed to and contribute to Japanese climate goals. So for the first phase in emission trading scheme, to promote CDL trading CDL credit, we are now allowing allowing CDL credits even if the voluntary credits. So and this is one action for us. And after that, we would like to stimulate the demand for CDL. So the level of carbon pricing is not still high enough to make bankable for a CDL business. So I think we have to take another measures to stimulate the demand for CDL. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about CDR so far, carbon dioxide removal, but I want to actually just pause. Chris brought this up a little bit, that you're both on the supply side as a project developer and the demand side. Let's actually take a moment to break down what is carbon dioxide removal, what is CDR. James and Joanna, your work, you both see a very wide portfolio of solutions. There's not actually just one way to remove carbon dioxide. There are, well, it depends on how you classify them, but there could be dozens of ways, ranging from very expensive to less expensive, very futuristic to very here and now, very technological to all the way down to natural. Let's start with James and then move to Joanna. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about the breadth of that portfolio and give us some specific examples, specifically of what's available today, and then maybe each of you can share your opinion of what is coming next, what's the cutting edge or the craziest exciting thing that you've seen come through on the carbon removal supply side, so who's actually able to do the carbon removal?
Yeah. So the way that I think about this market, the things that you can get today, predominantly what you can get today in the market is going to be reforestation credits and IFM credits. These are going to be changing kind of timber harvesting practices to induce more carbon removals.
From trees.
Yeah, from trees.
So that trees suck more because trees, as part of the carbon cycle, remove carbon naturally.
Correct.
There are practices that you can engage in that enable trees to eat more carbon.
So it's about planting new trees that grow, and as they grow, photosynthesis allows them to store carbon in their trunks and in their roots and in their leaves. That makes up most of what the market is today. And just to give people some ballpark numbers to think about, a good reforestation project somewhere in Brazil or in Africa, you're probably looking at a price point between, let's say, $25 and $50 today. Just a kind of baseline.
Per ton.
Per ton of CO2. That's all of these are traded in per ton of CO2. The other credit, maybe before I get into the other credits, the other important concept here to think about is durability. A tree will last decades, maybe 100 years. There is some debate on how long forests live, but let's just keep it there. Decades is a good time scale to think about trees. When we think about CDR, durability is a really important concept to start to differentiate what the different projects are achieving. The next type of project that you see a lot of in the market today is biochar. It's basically creating charcoal. Put some biomass into an oven, burn it with no oxygen, you create stable carbon removal. It is good because the durability is much longer. We're now talking about centuries of carbon removal. Scale is probably in the tens of thousands of tons per year, but it's a technology we know very well. It's very easy to scale up. So that is kind of where a lot of volume is coming in today. And price points there, think of it as like $150 per ton, but as it scales, you can get down to $75 a ton. When you want to start to ramp up in the durability into like millennia, thousands of years, because that's really what we're trying to drive towards. Now we're talking about things like direct air capture. This is pulling CO2 directly out of the air with fans, having it react with some kind of chemical or some kind of mineral or rock, and then storing that CO2 directly in the ground. This can also come in the form of what we call bioenergy with carbon capture storage or biomass with carbon capture storage. It is effectively taking waste residues from agricultural practices, taking other types of waste residues from existing operations, gasifying it, or finding a way to basically reduce it down to its kind of basic carbon format, I guess. Store that underground. You now have long-term durable CDR. The price range on these, a lot of these, and Joanna can probably talk about this more, wide range of approaches, some of them fairly simple, some of them that can be scaled more quickly, some of them extremely technologically out there, we'll say, and they need a lot of breakthroughs to really think about achieving these things at scale. Price range can go anywhere from $200 a ton to $2,000 a ton. Very, very small scale today, but by 2030, lots of estimates that we'll start to see 100,000 ton, maybe megaton scale projects there. But these are, when you start to get to megaton projects, you now start to introduce not just technological risk, but delivery risk, project management risk, government risk. And so, the bigger these things get, you start to pile on more risks. They get very, very hard to do. So.
Joanna, tell us about what costs $2,000 a ton. What is the most out there thing that you've seen, and why are people out there buying things? Why are people joining Frontier and paying $2,000 a ton?
Great question. James, that was a great summary of what some of the options are of carbon removal. At Frontier, we are focused on the things that are removing carbon for 1,000 years or more. So the really durable removal solutions. And we have two programs. So we buy really early pilot projects, and we'll be a first buyer for things that are getting off the ground. And then we also buy larger projects that are more mature through a different program. But so we see a lot of things on the cutting edge, things that are just coming out of universities and academic labs or incubators. And what gets us really excited is that there are so many different ways to remove carbon. You can remove carbon, for example, by applying a specific type of mineral on agricultural land, and it can actually help the farmer with the soil health potentially provide a revenue stream at the same time as removing carbon durably. There are ways to add certain materials to coastlines or even rivers and react to draw more CO2 from the surface ocean without contributing to acidity in the ocean. There are really cool ways to integrate carbon removal into our existing waste system. So think sewage, non-sexy industries like wastewater. There are a lot of really creative ways that we're seeing. One really cool company is Banyu. They basically use a molecule that reacts with sunlight to remove more CO2 out of the ocean. So really futuristic, but something that, while expensive today, we're talking anywhere from $500 to $1,500 roughly a ton, but it has the potential long-term to be really cheap. And so that's what we care about. It's fine if it's costly today, but can it get to climate relevant scales and can it get to really cheap so that when we're trying to have carbon removal at a really large scale, we have those solutions.
I want to ask my second to last question, and it's for you, Chris. You mentioned project development very briefly a while back. We've talked about things that sound like they're fresh out of the lab, very futuristic. We also talked about planting trees. That requires actual workers. What does the actual project development and sort of labor force participation look like around a big project like what Mitsubishi is pursuing with Shell in Louisiana? Like, this is a construction project, right? Like, this is a real industry and a real business. This is not just the purview of scientists. So who all is involved, and what does it look like if I'm standing there at the project? Am I wearing a construction hat? Tell me some of the nuts and bolts, the practical reality of it.
Yeah, thanks. So if I talk specifically maybe about the DAX, the direct air capture project in Louisiana that we're building with Shell, it's very similar to a refinery or any type of other industrial large-scale asset. We're actually building a plant, a massive plant. So, and we've been doing it in the past in other industries. So I think there's a lot of labor, a lot of knowledge out there's already that you can leverage on to build stuff. The only difference is the technology. It's just about the technology that we're actually removing carbon from the atmosphere is kind of new. So there is an actual technology risk, but that said, it's a very much similar industrial asset. If I talk about a US project, obviously, because there will be constructions, there'll be a lot of jobs associated to that actual labor of construction there. There'll be people on ground building stuff. There'll be people on ground actually doing the engineering. Maybe beyond that, maybe there's the procurement side of the stuff. But I think if you thinking about the local context, what's really important to understand is the whole value chain. So people in Japan cannot really relate these projects with themselves because it's happening in like the US or the EU. But if you think more broadly, there's a lot of components in that asset. For example, some of the materials, the raw materials, or there's maybe that DAC module, the facility itself. There may be the heat pumps that we're great at. There may be the electronics. There may be the software systems that we can develop. These things can be developed in Japan, Asia, any other country that is not the area that the project is located. So I think you want to think more broadly in the value chain. And if you combine this is a massive industry, very similar to like the vehicle industries, again, having multiple value chain players in the market involving a lot of industry, a lot of people, not just local, but global. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. I love that answer. And for myself, as a venture capital investor, who used to work in software, I've long had a thesis similar to Mark Andreessen that software is eating the world, but also that climate is eating the world, meaning it is not something that is going to stay localized to specific geographies like the United States or the EU. And if we think about software, it sort of started with semiconductors, which started in Silicon Valley, but then quickly involved Asia and Europe, and now is everywhere. And I love your point about how carbon removal will involve not only the United States and the EU potentially on the demand side, but also Japan on the buy side, and Japan and the rest of Asia on the production side. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about how we get Asia involved, how we get Japan involved, and where are we in the timeline of everything? Are we early? Is this kind of happening already? Are we late? Are we on the cusp of a big explosion? Where are we on the timeline? And how does Asia fit into all of it? Anybody jump in? This is our last question, so just free for all.
I think about everything in terms of sports. I think we're probably in the second inning of the game here. It's if inning one was there's this strange new class of projects. Nobody knew it. I think about New York Climate Week. Last year, carbon removal was front and center on the marquee of New York Climate Week. The years prior, nowhere to be found. On the sidelines, kind of a niche thing, still very, very small. I consider that inning one. We've now kind of reached a kind of tipping point in where we're in conversations. The Economist has entire issues now dedicated to carbon removal. They're sending people to the groundbreaking of Stratos in Texas. So inning two, now people are starting to evolve their understanding of what it's going to take to build these projects. I think they're starting to grapple with how hard this is going to be. But that's good. I think there's people putting real money, real expertise. Labor forces are shifting into these types of projects. That's inning two. We've got a super long way to go to reach megaton scale and then gigaton scale eventually. But I'm extremely. I wouldn't be in this industry if I didn't think we couldn't get there. But yeah, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride along the way, I'm sure. So.
Maybe mention about where we're at. I think it's no longer science. So carbon removal exists. I think that's what's really important. You can actually go and see a project. It's no longer a lab. There's actual direct air capture facilities that are operating. So you can have a chance to actually visit and see on your own it actually works. It's no longer science fiction. I think that's really important in the Asian context because a lot of people still think, is it real? Is it really there? But it is. Another point is, again, in the Asian context, maybe more local here in Japan. So METI done an amazing job. They send a clear message to the market. They're going to involve CDR as an offset strategy for the ETS system. Also have a strategy how they want to develop a new economy involved in CDR in the value chain. So I think there's already a clear message from the government level that you should be working on this because this is going to be really big. So you really don't want to miss that opportunity. But that said, we're still not part of that problem. There's only few companies, maybe like us, Mitsui OSK Lines. There's a couple of folks I see here that is involved in the value chain, but it's still a small industries. So I really encourage that second wave to come. Think about what you can do as in your industry, as an individual to be part of this industry, because there's tons and various ways that you can be part of. And once you figure that out, I think it's quite easy to be involved in CDR. And that can be either developing your technology, that may be just simply buying stuff, providing materials to the facilities, providing software again. I think there's various ways you can be involved, and I really encourage that second wave to come in Asia, not just the climate impact, but from that business opportunity perspective, yeah.
CDR market is expanding, especially in United States, but maybe the market will eventually expand to the entire world. And because nearly all of countries have committed to net zero goal and they will need carbon removal. But on the other hand, not all countries will become a carbon removal supplier because, for example, direct air capture needs renewable energy and CO2 storage sites. And so it's preferable to implement DACs in the area that is abundant, CO2 storage site and renewable energy abundant. But for example, Japan has many promising CO2 capture technologies from the air, but we are not blessed with these implementation sites. So we should we should advance a collaboration with suitable sites in global. And I think Southeast Asia is one of the high potential, I see. And so we should advance collaboration with these countries. So, so that is why we should advance the global collaboration. And so the global CDL ecosystem has started growing rapidly, and maybe it's not too early to act now to strategically think about carbon removal.
Yeah, just quickly, I think climate change is a global problem. It has to require global solutions. We have purchased from a number of companies that are building carbon removal solutions all over the world, in Kenya, in the UK, in Turkey, everywhere. And we have multiple projects who are partnering with large Japanese companies to build the projects and make them come to life. Talked to a number of folks this week alone who are doing really, really cutting edge research in carbon removal. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here in Asia and then in Japan specifically. And we are very excited to follow along as a buyer.
Well, you heard it here today. Carbon removal is here, and by here I mean literally here in Japan in so many different ways, in Asia and around the world. We are really excited to be sharing more news about carbon removal with you, and we hope that you'll continue to seek out education and information about this topic, because we're really, as James said, in the early innings of what is going to be a massive global industry involving a very diverse range of participants on both the buy side and on the sell side. And we think it's really exciting. We're all involved in some way, shape, or form. So we're all betting on this with our own time. And thank you for your interest and for being here today.
All right, thank you.